It's so nice meeting all of you guys. So we are meeting, to be precise, we are e-meeting amid uh, the raging pandemic, which refuses to be contained at the moment as we speak. And the most crucial and the most consequential of all time, perhaps, the US presidential election that has reached its final stage, its culmination, and the signs of of escalating Cold War between global powers and a looming global economic crisis. And as students of political science, it's important for you people to keep track of these developments and make sense of the developments around us. And I appreciate this effort on your front on your side to conduct this webinar, and I thank for this opportunity, and I especially my friend Sajal who called me for this webinar. So I'll just begin my presentation right now. So let me just take my okay. Sorry, it started with thank you for some reason. I've Yes, this is on India's internet economy, rise of digital commerce, entrepreneurialism, and techno nationalism. That's a subject we are going to discuss. So early this week, as I was preparing for this webinar, I came across this interesting term, activity at a distance. So in the past 7-8 months, ever since we all have pretty much locked down, this activity at a distance has become all the more relevant. So we learn, we buy things more or less, and we watch movies, and we meet more significantly online through internet. So here we are going to discuss about the politics and economics of the of internet basically. So let's begin with. I want to actually start with something. I hope you guys would like. Uh, so you can see this. Okay. By the way, I some of the things I want to say. As you saw right at the beginning, my internet connection has gone off. So maybe in just in case the net acts funny, I'll have an alternate connection. I'll come back. The other thing I want to say, I want to keep this fairly interactive. So I would expect you guys to sort of use the chat box and sort of respond to some of the things, or even sort of some of the things you may want to tell us. So you may please use the chat box very actively. So can you guys see the slide that I'm seeing? Hello. Yeah. So yeah, sure, good. So okay, please use the chat box. Of course, will ask questions. So I'm sure this context, this film star, and what this troll is all about. You all must be sort of aware of. So every Malayali knows at least 10 Baijus. Maybe a name which is more popular than Baiju in Kerala is maybe Shaji. So this is about Baiju. So, and this is about Baijus and Baiju Ravindran, who is the most famous of all Baijus. So he's the founder of Baiju, the learning app. So probably the largest company in the world, which is named after the founder himself. Uh, so and that's one of the distinctions of many distinctions that Baiju would have. So we will get into that. So who is Baiju Ravindran? So you all would know him. He's now, he was, I think last year, one of the channels have sort of made him the person of the year. So he is son of teacher parents. He studied in local school in Malayalam medium in Arikod in Kannur, and he played sevens football, and he plays forward. He still plays football, by the way, and he's Messi fan. So he studied in Kannur Engineering College. So he's pretty much like you and me, pretty much like any boy next door. And but what about his company? His company Byju's. Byju's is the you all know Byju's. So as we saw, it's now across media, even in trolls, as we saw. So world's most valued edtech company, and it has got 64 registered, 64 million students registered. So that's 6.4 crore students are using Byju's, the learning app, and 4.2 million or 42 lakh people are paying for it. And during the lockdown, the usage had only increased. And even prior to the lockdown, Baiju has been having a good run for a fairly long time. So its revenue doubled in the last financial year to 2,800 crore, and that's only going to go up during this financial year. So Baiju recently said it's going to triple to 7,500 crore this year, and he's going to make a profit of 1,000 crore. So that makes him a rare internet startup in India, which makes that kind of a profit and revenue. And maybe what makes it a head turner of sorts for all across the globe is the valuation that it commands. It is 10.5 billion valued, that is 80,000 crore. And Baiju still holds about 30% of the company, and so I believe so he himself would be individually worth about 24,000 crore, and he's the youngest billionaire in India. And that's about Byju's, whom you all know pretty much. And so there is another person whom I want to sort of introduce to you. Or, I would like to understand whether, so, this boy, anyone can answer, anyone can even use the chat box to tell me who this is. So this boy, of course, this is a 9-year-old picture. This picture was taken in 2011, and this is a 17-year-old boy when the picture was taken. Like any 17-year-old boy who came to a city, a new city, he was posing with some random things. Here, a 2-seater electric car which is parked on the roadside, and the boy is posing. But he's not an ordinary boy, given what he has done subsequently. So as we see him in the picture as a 17-year-old boy, he was starting a company. His name is Ritesh Agarwal. So who is Ritesh Agarwal? Ritesh Agarwal is from Raigada. Raigada is on the border of Andhra and Orissa. It's a small town, a small village, and he is son of a grocery store owner there. His father was running a grocery store, and he studied in a local missionary school there, paying 250 rupees as monthly fee. And as you see, his second name, Agarwal. Agarwals are the trading community across the North India, and of course, they're all over. They're in Bangalore, so many. In many other cities, basically, they travel, they go long distances and set up their businesses like that. His dad went all the way from Haryana to to Orissa and set up the business. The same way, he went to Kota. Kota is the place where a lot of the people in North India, they go to Kota. Kota is, you guys know Kota? Kota is IIT factory, if I would say so, because people go there, study there, do their high secondaries, and along with that, they prepare for IIT entrance, engineering entrance. So he also went to do the same. He was expected to do the same, like many of the kids from his background and his community. And but so he skipped classes, and he sneaked into many startup conferences and sort of tried to learn about how to start companies. And at the age of 17, as we see him in the previous picture, he 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 started a company. So the company he started, some of you would know, the company is Oyo. This is one of the hotels. Oyo is a hotel company. It's just got hotels all across the world, Oyo branded hotels. So it's like the way that the Uber or Ola operates. Car is yours, but technology is mine. So we share the income. The same way a hotel could be owned by somebody else, operated by somebody, but Oyo gives the technology, brand, etc., booking, etc. So that's how the business is run. That's called aggregation. So aggregation is made possible by internet. So a lot of things are aggregated. Cars are aggregated, hotels are aggregated. So he aggregates hotels, and that turned out to be a huge business. So he got 1 million rooms. That's about 10 lakh hotels. Sorry, 10 lakh rooms across 50,000 hotels and 150,000 vacation homes. So that makes him one of the largest hotel chains in the world. So this is at its peak. Of course, Oyo went through a lot of troubles, especially after the pandemic. So the figures have changed a little, but this is what he achieved, at least. So as last year when I was speaking to him, at the age of 26, he was leading 17,000. He had 17,000 people working for him at Oyo, and another 100,000 across the hotels that that's part of the Oyo brand. And Oyo was spread across 24 countries. India is the key market, and then China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Europe, US. And the company was again valued 10 billion, and he raised 3.6 billion. So that's about again 22,000, 23,000 crore rupees. And then so that's about Oyo. And there is other some other guys whom I want to sort of show to you guys. So I'm hoping so some of you would be familiar with these faces. So these are, the one in blue t-shirt is Sachin Bansal, and the other is Vinny Bansal. So they are the poster boys of Indian internet. They started a company. I'll explain more about about them in the next slide. So they are the first Indian startup billionaires. So before turning, I think in mid 30s, they became sort of they're billionaires. So the work became $1 billion. That's about 7,500 crore. So before Baiju and before Ritesh, these guys came onto the scene. They were the poster boys, as I said, of Indian internet, and they sold their company to Walmart for 20 billion. So I hope some of you would know the fourth point in the slide. I deliberately left sort of blank. You guys might probably know the company that they started, and many of you would be buying things from the company which they started, which is now part of Walmart. That's Flipkart. So soon their story is going to be a movie. So one of my colleague in business journalism has written a book on them, Big Billion Startups. That's turned out to be a movie script, and it's the movie is in the making. So that's about them. And who are Bansals? They're, of course, they're not related to each other. One is Sachin Bansal and the other is Binny Bansal. But they studied together in IIT Delhi. They are both of, incidentally, both of them are from Chandigarh. And they, of course, they were bright students. They were toppers throughout. And so after their studies, they landed in Bangalore. They worked for Amazon. And they got bored of their work and they started an e-commerce site, and the rest is history. Uh, So now this guy, some of you might know, of course, his company is written over there, and you must be sort of doing transactions on the company that he has started. That's Paytm, Pay Through Mobile. That's the expanded form of Paytm. So Vijay Shekhar Sharma, his name, he founded Paytm. He comes from a small town, and he's son of a school teacher, and he studied in Hindi medium. He started a mobile recharge business and built a mobile wallet later. And that company is the most valued startup in India at the moment. 16 billion is the valuation. So this is about people, and now I want to show you this mythical animal. Many of you must be aware, have sort of are familiar with, at least in your childhood stories. So with this one horn beast with so that's unicorn. So while that's about that's for children, it's unicorn is this one horn beast. It has got a different meaning in a different context. It's especially when we discuss about the startups in startup world, they are the privately owned startup companies which are worth 1 billion or more, or 7,500 crore in rupee terms. So India has produced in the last 5-6 years, India has produced about 30 unicorns, and 22 of them are by serving uh, digital commerce, various digital services basically. So starting from Flipkart, Paytm, Byju's, Oyo, Ola, Swiggy, Zomato. You would be Kuka, some of the companies you must be familiar with. I think most of the big baskets. So this is about the India's internet unicorns. So, and now, why do they matter? Why do we discuss about them? They matter because they are the major actors in the the rising Indian digital economy. They run the largest commerce, education, payment, travel, logistics companies on the internet. Uh, and why do that matter? Okay, yes, they are big companies, we agree. So why do that matter? So that matter because the pandemic has made it much clearer to us that uh, you know the uh, the role of digital solutions in our life has increased tremendously. So uh, some of you must know this person. So he is somebody, especially those who follow business. So he was CEO of Infosys. His name is Vishal Sikka. He came from another famous company in this SAP. So he's known to be not just a leading technology technocrat, corporate executive. He's a thought leader too. So in his speeches, he used to say something which I found very interesting, and I picked it for our presentation. That's the world around us is being fundamentally reshaped by software. So the pandemic, as I said, so the way we are the various activities at a distance that we do these days actually make it all the more all the more sort of, it became all the more relevant for all of us that, that the world is being reshaped by software. So what about India? So this is McKinsey. McKinsey is the global consultancy firm. It comes up with very deep, um, very credible, deep studies about various aspects of economy. And this is about the India's digital economy. So we are talking about the rising digital economy. So let's understand how big the Indian digital economy is. So, so this is how India has the second largest internet user population. So 56 crore people in India are now connected to internet. So by 2023, it would be 80 crore. So it has been sort of, it has seen tremendous rise in the past few years. So, in 2080, the number of internet users was twice as many as in 2014. So the numbers doubled in 4 years. So the data cost came down by 95% compared to 2013-11. So there's a huge smartphone explosion. Sorry, that's a different connotation, when we say explosion. So it's a the proliferation of smartphones we have seen. So therefore so many people have become part of the digital economy. So 1.2 billion biometric IDs. So everybody that way has got a digital footprint. So technology sector, IT, BPO, digital, the internet that we talked about, employ 6.5 crore people in India. So it's a very strong economic engine too. So who are the key players? So one is of course the FANG is the acronym for the major US technology companies, internet companies, which are pretty much dominating the global digital economy. That is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. So they, especially Facebook, Amazon, and Google, are very strong in India. And then Jio, of course, Jio has provided the digital infrastructure which changed the sort of which changed the course of Indian internet usage. They, of course, disrupted the data price, and then of course, the market itself. And on top of that, now they are building various digital services. So that's about Jio, and then the unicorns which we talked about, starting from Byju's, Flipkart, and all that. So they're the key players. So now, when we talk about these unicorns, it's one of the things that that's very interesting, and that's worth taking note is, who are they? I mean, who are those founders, who built these companies? So they are children of school teachers, government employees, shopkeepers, as we saw, and they are first generation entrepreneurs. They went on to become founders of billion-dollar companies, and a quarter of century after liberalization, the stage has been set for many first generation entrepreneurs to make it big. So that's very interesting. So because otherwise, okay. So otherwise, the Indian business, the economy, the large companies, institutions, wealth was pretty much controlled or dominated by the traditional Indian business elite. That begins to change with the internet, And to some extent, the next slide, what you some of you would be um, familiar with this person. Uh, he is Sundar Pichai. He he's the CEO of Google. He's Indian, of course. Many Indians are now leading Silicon Valley companies. That's another thing. Thanks to IITs, a lot of people went on to become brilliant technologists. Who turned out to be technology leaders. And Pichai is one of them. And he tells about himself that the internet has really changed his own life. So in one of the recent interviews, he was saying, when he traveled from India to US for the first time, it required his dad's entire annual income to sort of send him to the US for his flight ticket. And now he went on to become the the most powerful leader of the most powerful internet company in the world. So he says internet is a great equalizer. So the story of the unicorn founders also reflects somewhat, not just them, a whole lot of people, reflect this socioeconomic change. So it actually sort of, brings to the focus the rise of entrepreneurialism in the country. Sorry. Yeah. The Indian business elite, as I said, so who constituted the most of a vast majority of the Indian business elite used to be the traditional wealthy people. So, but we are beginning to see, or we have sort of, we are seeing a upward socioeconomic mobility, and many people breaking into that business elite. So this change is very interesting, but how far that has changed? So the first generation entrepreneurs, okay. So, but having said that, first generation entrepreneurship is not something that began with the unicorns, with the internet, that started maybe late 2000, like 2008 when Flipkart has started. So it has a history. It has a longer history, starting with Infosys. So Infosys is not an internet company. It's of course, it's an IT service company. So, but and it started in early 80s. It is 1981. Infosys was started. So the founders were again from middle class backgrounds. All they had was their education. They were all bright engineers. So they started this company, some of them pledging the jewelry in their family, and set up this company in a 3-bedroom flat in a residential area in Pune. And it now went on to become a 4,780, 478,000 crore market cap company, producing a lot of wealth and distributing a lot of wealth, because a lot of people have sort of got employed with that company. And so this actually also brings to focus one of the interesting phenomenon that happened across the world. Technology, be it India or US, technology across the world as a vehicle of socio-economic mobility is something that that I think we should deeply study about. So this happened in India. So not just Infosys, hundreds of big and small IT service companies came onto the scene, again by people with similar background, so educated people, but not necessarily from a very wealthy background. Not at all from super rich background. So they're all, maybe some of them would be upper middle class background, but not from super rich background. But startups in 2000s, which we talked about, they have taken this to at the next level. The the composition of India's billionaires club. Every year, the magazines, the business magazines, come up with the richest Indians, the list of richest Indians. So if you look at that, so the share of uh, uh, the self-made first generation entrepreneurs are increasing year by year, which is an interesting change. So many people are breaking into the higher levels of India's business elites. So, but I here, I take a pause, because I just don't want to romanticize this beyond a point, so because there are certain other aspects that we need to see. This is so how far that has sort of, you know, uh, triggered a social change is something that we should look at. So therefore, some of the other aspects of this change, I want to bring to your focus. So this is so while we speak about entrepreneurship, the rise of entrepreneurialism, etc., uh, we also see that there are so many companies in India. Even most of them are, many companies, many entities, have to register themselves for various purposes. Therefore, there is a registry of companies. If you look at, this is from an EPW study, a paper on, which is published on EPW. That says that, so while the disadvantaged sections constitute about 16.5% of the population, so their ownership of business only 10%. Only 10% companies belong to them, and many of them are 1 to 2 people companies, which means the average size of their firms are the people from uh, unprivileged backgrounds are much smaller, and their access to capital are limited. So, and there is another study, very interesting study, that's on the role of caste in corporate India. So it says that, that's by 2 3 people from IIM. So they studied 24,000 companies of certain size, which are like, top 24,000 companies. So of those companies, 80% of corporate board members, directors of these companies are from privileged social backgrounds. So while we say that, there is an upward social, there is a circulation of wealth, there's a upward social mobility in some sections, it's still pretty much, it's still pretty much limited to sort of, maybe, it is yet to transcend beyond, it is yet to transcend the caste barriers per se. Um, so that's about entrepreneurialism, rise of sort of uh, the internet, billionaires, unicorns, etc. So now I move on to something completely different, another section that's about so this is about internet being the great equalizer, providing scope for building companies and making it big and changing the composition of business elites, circulation of wealth, social mobility, etc. So, but there is another aspect, which is becoming, which is increasingly in focus in these days. So that's what, we're going to discuss. That's about the disruptions that the internet is now sort of, uh, the disruptions that internet is causing is now being discussed greatly. So you the you would be able to read, what's there. The technology that connects us also controls us. So this line is from the widely talked about documentary that that was launched, that uh, sort of, that was premiered last month. So many of you would have seen it. Many of you would be watching Netflix, I believe, and so you know this about this documentary, which is sort of, become a subject of, very wide discussion. So that's the so this is that documentary that's Social Dilemma. That okay. So it was on Netflix from September 9. So I watched that. Sorry, I hope it's not something. Okay, so yeah, so that's about just a second. So let me see. I'm hoping our presentation is going fine. Uh, so you guys are able to sort of. I'm just checking. Hello. Yeah, so it's not from any of you guys. Therefore, I believe this presentation is on. Yeah, no issues. Yeah, thank you very much. So okay, I'll come back to this. That's about the social dilemma. So that's became um, that's became a subject of worldwide discussion. So it's about how it primarily talked about to me it primarily talked about how the social fault lines are being amplified by social media platforms, by the internet. uh, you know and the agenda behind it, basically. So that's what the film was talking about. So let's and those people who were talking, who were featured in this documentary, they all came out of they were all smart, world leading engineers. So they went on to become top leaders in many of these companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other companies. They all came out of those companies, and they were talking about some of the dangers that see in the rise of these companies, or in the way that these companies are operating. And and uh, uh, the the biggest thing that they talked about was about fake news. How fake news is is being amplified, is you know uh, is becoming viral, um, thanks to these platforms. It was something very revealing to me that that fake news travels 6 times faster than the real news. That's what they said. And actually, these platforms, be it Facebook or Twitter, they don't really control fake news, and they're saying that there is a reason why they don't control, because uh, fake news obviously travel faster. More people share when fake news are essentially more sensational. So it triggers emotions, and therefore more people share them, and there is more engagement. When there is more engagement, there is more users, and the more users, the more money. So one of them was used this very interesting term called disinformation economy. So misinformation for profit is something which is uh, very concerning, and while and this is something that's being talked about, and that's very much in focus right now. And one interesting term that came out in the recent years is alt facts. So what's alt facts? Alt facts is nothing but disinformation or lie. So alternative facts. What's alternative facts? I'll read this out to you. So it's alternative facts is a phrase used by US, the US president. So alt facts actually came onto the scene pretty much with the presidency of Donald Trump. Um, so it's one of the president's aide, Kellyanne Conway. She said, while reporters were questioning her about some of the false statements Donald Trump's press secretary had made about the something as sort of something as funny as something about the crowd for the inauguration of President Donald Trump's inauguration as President of the United States, the attendance numbers. So, what the press secretary said was actually contrary to the established facts. And then when this lady was asked about that, she said, well, uh, there are alternate facts. So alternate facts is nothing but lie, but that's reincarnated as something much more honorable in the name of alternate facts. So which some many people subscribe to, while that's actually tells us about the polarization that happens, uh, and there is no agreement on what is fact and what is not fact. So when there is no shared facts, that's its consequence for democracies are, it's not just about uh, the crowd at the inauguration of as of US president. So it's about it's beyond that. It's about every subject, every uh, sort of every controversial subject, every matter of debate, there is no agreement basically. So I want, so this person, this is he's a famous US technology leader. Again, he was the early investor in Facebook. His name is Roger McNamee. He wrote a book called he was again one of the person who spoke on that documentary, which Social Dilemma. So he mentioned about he wrote a book, Waking Up to Facebook Catastrophe. So why is Facebook is a catastrophe? You and I use it. So this is what he said. Democracy depends on shared facts and values. It depends on deliberation and the rule of law. It depends on having a free press and other countervailing forces to hold the powerful accountable. Facebook has undercut the free press from two directions. It has eroded the economics of journalism and then overwhelmed it with disinformation. On Facebook, information and disinformation look the same. The only difference is that disinformation generates more revenue. It gets better treatment. So some of these things in this statement is very, very relevant for us. So democracy depends on shared facts and values. So we are increasingly, we see the shared facts and values are, are under threat basically. So, and information and disinformation look the same on social media platforms, be it Facebook or WhatsApp, so uh, and the so therefore the danger behind it basically. So, and these people, these technology leaders, who came out of these big companies and spoke about the dangers that we are facing, they they were asked, what do they fear as a consequence of this emerging trend? They said creation of surveillance state. So everybody is being snooped, is being sort of sorry. So that's one. And then democracies are under attack because, as we discussed, there is no shared facts and values. So there is no consensus basically. So actually, democracies run on consensus, agreement. Of course, you guys know better than me. You study politics, political science. So, and elections are hacked. Elections is something that they fear. The mandates are going to be overturned because of technology, because of fake news, and civil war, because people are not ready to accept. So again, the question of shared facts. shared values. And then environmental catastrophe, because there is a, if you look at internet, there is a very strong school of thought saying climate change is a hoax. So that's being amplified by, again, the platforms that we talked about. So that's about the social disruption part. So which is, of course, the world is now waking up to it. That's why there is this documentary, Social Dilemma. In case you guys, some of you may, if you have not seen, you just go to their website, so ask for a sort of so I think, so to facilitate, for the for you guys to watch it. So that's very interesting that so world is waking up to this challenge right now. So, and then now we come to the last part uh, of the topic, that's techno nationalism. So what is techno nationalism? Techno nationalism is, in simple terms, it is the tech power of companies that domiciled in a particular country becoming the symbol of the might of a country in the global arena. So that's how I would put it. So that's as maybe a very simple explanation. So so the other way, basically, when we see the latest developments, you can say that the internet is at the center of geopolitics. So there are why is it at the center of geopolitics? Why companies are sort of are being increasingly scrutinized for their management of the data that they possess about people who are their users, because there is increasing concerns about the data security, the flow of data from one country to the other, and how that's going to be used. So data security is now sort of is increasingly a concern from a national security point of view. And so this term cyber sovereignty is something which I would want to leave you guys with. That's the word I picked from one of the speeches by Li Jinping, the Chinese premier. So now come to so this, when we talk about geopolitics and internet at the center of geopolitics and techno nationalism, TikTok becomes very you know uh, becoming a matter of special interest, because what is TikTok? TikTok, of course, and you guys, many of you would have used them. Now I think there is restriction. So TikTok is owned by this Chinese company called ByteDance, and that's valued 140 billion. That's the world's most valuable startup. Again, startups, of course, the young companies, like maybe have maybe 7-year-old, 8-year-old, maybe 3-year-old, from 1 to sort of 0 to 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old companies, and then they are privately held and they're not sort of publicly listed. So these companies are called startups, and of course we discussed a lot about startups in the initial part of this presentation. So TikTok, one Chinese company, is the most valued startup in the world. That again tells the technology, the rising technology might of China. So this is, it used to be earlier, the sort of, these kind of technology innovations predominantly came from US, be it Google, be it Facebook. So, but now, China also has sort of, has come up with companies which are highly innovative. So TikTok is one example, and it got 1.5 billion users. And interestingly, so this escalating tension between US and China is something that you guys are aware of. And TikTok is at the center of this controversy. It's the all leading publications across the world had this particular news item running for days, for weeks, called TikTok news, because TikTok, the US President Donald Trump, insisted that the US arm of TikTok has to be controlled by the US entities. So the TikTok was forced to sort of divest some of its stake, and I think that that's still far from settled. So that's so so it became, it's at the, because the Chinese sorry, the US administration was suspecting data, sort of data flow to China through TikTok. Therefore, they wanted strict control over the management of data and the ownership of the company. And we have sort of, the India and China had this border conflict very recently, and so again TikTok became the center of this controversy. So uh, post that border conflicts, India banned this TikTok app. India was the one of the largest uh, market for, user base for TikTok, and suddenly that TikTok is banned in India. So interestingly, so 10 to 15 years back, we could not have even imagined this. One social media platform, predominantly people use for entertainment and time pass, short videos basically. So that becomes at the center of geopolitical conflict. So that pretty much tells us about, so how important the internet and internet entities are becoming as far as the geopolitics is concerned. So so now, as I said, so the in techno national, in terms of techno nationalism, the countries are using their technology companies as a means of soft power, and as a means to influence, as a means for global influence, in fact. So Fang versus Bat, Fang. Fang is again, we mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, that pretty much represent the US, uh, internet companies, internet industry. And all across the world, there is this competition between these two set of internet companies, technology companies. On one side, there is Fang from the US, and the other is Bat by China. Bat is Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent from China. So so as political science students, you guys, you would be sort of uh, aware of this Belt and Road initiative by China, that is to sort of build this long road that connects China with so many countries, and that will step up its strategic and trade relations with these countries. So BAT is now termed as the China's Digital Belt and Road Initiative. So what, in this context, okay, it's important to understand what India is doing. So India also has got, is a rising, is a major global power, and we can't be left behind in terms of our initiative in establishing ourselves as a tech power. So when it comes to discussing what India is doing, so I would actually want to simplify this by, bringing to you this tweet by Harsh Goenka. So who is Harsh Goenka? Harsh Goenka is chairman of RPG Enterprises. RPG has got a bunch of businesses. It is sort of, I think, 20,000 crore or even beyond that, revenue, turnover, business group. So it has got this Harrison's Malayalam estates across Kerala. And it has got this SEAT tires and many other businesses basically. So Harsh Goenka, the chairman of RPG Group, he spoke to Mukesh Ambani, chairman of Reliance, the uh, the man behind Jio. And after that, so he came and after Jio had this huge fundraising. So that's what we'll discuss about that in the next slide. So then he said this, the way Jio is rising, I predict a new world order in tech with India leading the pack. Move over Fangs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Netflix, and Google, and BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. Tech Worlds is going to be Django. Django is something, uh, I know that. So in Kerala, that's again another um, popular term that comes up in various hilarious trolls. So TechWorld is going to be Django, Geo, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and others. So that pretty much sums up the India approach. India approach is more of sort of technology alliance, because our technology policy so far, we okay, I'll come to that. So then what about Geo platform, which he talked about? Sorry. Yeah. So it's important to understand. So what's the I'll go back to the this slide. So India's technology policy so far has been guided by our free market principles. We've had pretty much an open door policy, which allowed a lot of US companies to come and set up businesses in India, unlike China, which is a walled garden. Facebook cannot operate in China. Twitter cannot operate in China. I think Google is also not there. So, but India has actually pretty much opened up its technology, and it has got. So right now, our policy is slightly changing. We are mostly sort of looking for alliances. So these companies are, it makes sense for them to ally with the Indian sort of Indian business powerhouses. So therefore, our policies are such that, so we have taken a probably slightly rigid policies are now sort of so that mandate these companies to, that makes sense for these companies to ally with the Indian companies. So that's happening with Geo platform, and Geo, on top of the digital infrastructure, the technology, the telecom infrastructure that Geo has built. Now it is coming up with a lot of internet services, including GeoMart, Agio. Some of you must be sort of buying sort of merchandise from these platforms, I believe. So what is Geo? Geo is now sort of valued in a year or so. It went on to become a 72 billion valued. That is 15,000 crore valued uh, company, and it raised $20 billion. So where did it raise that kind of money from? Facebook, Google, Intel, Qualcomm all invested money in Geo, and then Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Mubadala, Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, they all invested money again. So there are other investors called TPG, Silver Lake, KKR, General Atlantic. They are the so this Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Saudi Investment Fund. So they are all the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund with trillions of dollars of money of corpus. And the same with the TPG, Silver Lake, KKR. They are private equity funds, private fund houses having hundreds of billions of dollars. So the world's biggest leading technology companies, the world's biggest sovereign wealth funds, world's biggest private fund houses, they all came together to fund Geo. So that's a power play, basically. So that's a financial power play. So whether it would translate into India having its own technology powerhouse is something that only the future would tell us. It's just beginning to play out. So I'll end my presentation with showing you something on Geo that that we have written about. So just a second, I'll just take that tab here. So this is it. So this is what the search for India's Tencent. Tencent is China's biggest one of the biggest technology companies. Alibaba and Tencent are the biggest technology companies in China. So, how techno-nationalism can expand India's global sphere of influence? We begin with, of course, this tweet. So, me and my friend have written this article. So, this is about, and here's an interesting, first in India and then confidently offering these made in India solutions to the rest of the world. So that's about Geo, and predominantly, what. Uh, okay, just a second. Yeah. So yeah, what we predominantly want to sort of touch on are some of the aspects of the rising internet. One is, of course, the rising entrepreneurship, how technology is becoming a great leveler, and the other the socioeconomic change, socioeconomic mobility, and the other is about the some of the concerns that's being widely shared across the across the globe, and the other is about the how it's becoming a central point as far as the geopolitical conflicts are concerned. How the how how technology, how internet is the is at the center of geopolitics. So that's what we have now come to the end of. I think so. Yeah. Uh, so I'll now sort of go to the some of the questions that came up. That's the end of the presentation. So now so so there is this question from Shiva J. Jain. India and Japan have signed a cybersecurity agreement that promotes cooperation in 5G, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. This agreement came into force amid India's backlash against the Chinese telecom giant Huawei. So, how will you respond to this new step taken by the government? So, I'm glad Shiva you asked this question because 5G is Huawei is very important when it comes to discussing uh, the global the geopolitical conflict, the Cold War, the trade war, we between China and US. One of the earliest flashpoint was around Huawei. Huawei has got advanced 5G equipment, and they were the technology vendor pretty much across the world. And US and its allies suddenly sort of they turned around. They alleged that the 5G equipment that Huawei is putting in place, offers scope for backdoor surveillance by China. So then there was this incident where a top official of Huawei, its CFO, it was held in Canada, an ally of US. So, and in the context of the rising conflict between India and China, it only makes sense for India to be absolutely cautious about sort of having this kind of engagement with the Chinese entities. So, yeah, and the other thing is that India is even otherwise has been restricting India's trade engagement with China ever since the border clashes have escalated. So not just the Huawei, even the Chinese companies like Alibaba and Tencent, their investments in India, they were investing in the unicorns which we talked about. Many of them, they are the leading investors. So now those investments are restricted. They are no longer able to invest the way that they used to. So they have to take approval from governments, which is not very easy to come by. So it's, of course, it's part of the rising geopolitical tensions. There is no doubt about that. So that's about this. And then there is a question from Anjali A. Alexei Capri says, techno-nationalism will manifest itself increasingly across all aspects of geopolitics, national security, economic competitiveness, even social values. Do you think India government's decision to ban TikTok marks the shift from traditional nationalism to techno-nationalism? So, as we speak, nationalism has become, has taken the center stage of politics in across countries. You people know it very well, and so the countries and communities have become more inward looking than they used to be. So but the as far as this specific incident of TikTok ban in India, is this a sign of techno nationalism? So I think it is. Of course, we all know that it's a reactive step following the border clashes. But what I would see, I see more hues of techno nationalism in the events that followed it. That is the encouragement of having our own versions of short video social media platforms. So many of them are coming up, and there were trolls even about something like JigJog. Some of you must have seen that. So yeah, that's about it. The so India wanting to have its own answer to some of the leading technology companies from the other side of the border is surely you know a techno nationalistic response. So, and the other question is from Needu B. Shaji. That's about uh, during the task force meeting on May 5 to discuss COVID-19, Prime Minister Narendra Modi emphasized the role of startups in fighting the pandemic. What's your viewpoint about this? So it's as in the past 7-8 months when we are pretty much in the lockdown. Of course, the lockdown has been eased ever since, but especially at the height of lockdown, we know that so the especially in metro areas where some of us live, most of the services were sort of be it purchase, that's mostly from Flipkart, and then or Big Basket, which actually deliver you grocery in metros where the pandemic was very strong and the restrictions were very strong. And you or even the other rising Kerala company called Fresh to Home, they deliver at your doorstep the fresh meat and fish. So these companies sort of pretty much help people, sort of lessen their sort of the burden of restrictions on them following the lockdown. So that way they helped fighting pandemic. So these kind of digital services, so they still play a role. And as far as the sort of the very sort of the medical and health related innovations are concerned, I think it's coming from big pharma and government. But when it comes to sort of these kind of digital services that help people sort of sort of manage restrictions, I believe startups have played a role. So Faisal Mustafa, Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently declared that India will aim to become a global hub for artificial intelligence through technical learning and developing technical skills. He also hoped that it will solve the long term issues of climate change and pollution. Are you an optimist in this regard? Um, okay, when it comes to 5G, we know that with Huawei, China has taken a lead there, and any global leader now recognize the fact that the countries should have advanced technology. So therefore it is be it artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing, whatever. So it is increasingly a requirement. It's seen as a sign of the the economic standing, economic power of a country to have advanced technology. Therefore, it's only natural for Prime Minister to emphasis on advanced technologies. So am I an optimist? I as a reporter, as a journalist who track these companies, I often talk to the companies and the investors who fund these companies. So I can only see that, so these companies, so there is a tremendous sort of growth, rise as far as these companies are concerned. Yeah. Okay, so that's about that question. So there is a rise. I was speaking to one of the sort of leading investors in this particular sector. The deep tech companies, enterprise tech companies. So one was saying that so India have, of course, has a bunch of those companies. In the next 10 years, there could at least be 50 companies, which are like billion-dollar companies who come out of this particular advanced technology areas. So one can only be hopeful about that. So now the question from Abel P. Jose, that's last question. So that's data shows that internet penetration in India is second lowest among the G20 economies. Many studies indicate the digital divide exists in varying degrees, and smartphone is a luxury in most of the rural areas. Given the context, the rising data cost, the inclusiveness of the internet economy is far from a reality. How equitable is the distribution of benefits out of the growth of internet economy in India? So very concerning question. It's I understand the spirit of this question. Of course, but as we two, three things basically that's about the I'm not sure if G20 is the right comparison, because among G20 countries, only Argentina, Brazil, and Indonesia would have living standards comparable with India. But I still think so they have higher per capita income and human development index compared to India. So India cannot really be compared with the rest of the countries in the G20 group. That's one thing. Second, as we saw, there is a huge upswing as far as the internet usage is concerned. So 56 crore people have now come onto the internet as far as India is concerned. Of course, many of them are consuming content mostly, that's YouTube or Facebook or WhatsApp, or not really transacting, not really, it may not necessarily have sort of translated into a tool of empowerment for many of them, but it is beginning to happen at some point. So therefore, and there are various aspects, but internet is an equalizer. And it, of course, it needs conscious efforts, and we know, inclusion is something hard-earned, and it's a work in progress. So that's what I can only say that. So with that, I think I come to an end. In case there is no other questions, I think we can probably I would leave it to